Hey there, greetings everybody. Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we read the second chapter of the first part of Charge of the Aspect. So this is again a 5-part e-series originally, ebook series. So each book has like 5 chapters, but we're reading it released entirely as a novel. So on that chapter, we got to see finally why we're reading this. In this part of the timeline, this actually should have been the first thing we read other than Chronicles, because this takes us back way into the ages of the proto-dragons, and we saw the proto-form of Alexstrasza and Malygos, and they found Alexstrasza's brother dead and like desiccated, killed by some necromantic magic. All right, so stay a while and listen to this. This is chapter 3, and that it's called Father of Dragons. Papa? Galak. Her voice was the first thing to pierce the darkness, and it drew him back to waking. He mumbled what should have been her name, although even to his ears the sounds made no sense. The former aspect opened his eyes, expecting both to be still lying in the tunnel and to have her leaning over him. Which of those would shame him more, he could not say. But when he peered around, it was to find himself alone and no longer lying in the passage. Somehow he had come to be transported to the gigantic cavern that was his sanctum. More perplexing, he even lay in his favored sleeping spot. But the question of how Galak had gotten here was a minor one to the Blue. What was more important was what had happened after he had blacked out. How long he had been lost within, Galak did not know, but he did have a very good idea as to the source of the startling visions. Uncurling stiff digits, the dragon beheld the seemingly insignificant artifact. A curse escaped him at sight of it, and he almost threw it against one of the cavern walls. Thinking better of it, the dragon instead turned toward a shadowy part of his sanctum. Galak drew forth a bit of that shadow. From within there emerged a large cubic shape that expanded before his eyes, growing immense enough to contain a night elf. It's oddly specific. Had Galak desired it larger, he could have expanded it with only a thought. The arcane prisons had been created for a variety of tasks, including what the second half of their name indicated. This was but one of many secreted in the Nexus, and Galak had chosen it because it was emptier than most. Blue energy crackling all around it, the massive cube floated slightly above the ground. To an onlooker it resembled a large box, seemingly made of wood and stone, and lined at each edge by a bronze metallic border. Rich blue seals ran across the center of each of the 4 sides from the top to the bottom, and a dark border ran across the middle, as if the top and bottom were separate halves kept together only by the seals and border. At the former aspect's unspoken command, the seals fell away, and the metallic border faded. Now acting like a lid, the upper half tipped open. Not all arcane prisons functioned in this manner. This one, being designed specifically for storage, could also open in several other ways, depending on what Galak needed of it. I'm trying to think, and I think those might be like those cubes, purplish cubes that you see in some of the dungeons. These are those older content dungeons. Thrusting his paw inside, the dragon deposited the artifact. There it not only would be safe from other eyes, but would no longer be able to taint his thoughts. Resealing, the arcane prison vanished again. Exhaling in relief, Galak recalled the voice that had brought him back from the blackness. This was not the first time that she had reached out to him since his departure from Dalaran. After their last meeting, she had no doubt assumed that he would contact her again, but he had found so many reasons not to, including his certainty that even she blamed him in part for not finding the iris. I don't remember this iris storyline thing. Like, it vaguely seems familiar. They could not continue this charade, Galak decided not for the first time. There was no path ahead that the two of them could travel together. And yet once again her voice touched him. Galak, speak to me. He wanted to ignore her, but his will had been too weakened by the visions. Besides, Galak told himself as an archmage, Perhaps the greatest one not with the blood of a dragon coursing through her veins. Oh, it must be Jaina. She might know something of the magic that would create a thing like what he had found. Jaina was, after all, the one who had helped him sense the focusing iris when his own efforts had failed. From that hunt alone, he considered her in many ways far more cunning, more adaptable than he, and that made him all the more shamed by his own failures. It also goes to show just the power of the mortal races and how it's growing into legendary protector of the world status. We already have in our prelude story the fact that Thrall is essentially as powerful as one of the dragon aspects when they're in aspect form. And now here we have Jaina showing in her own magical way, she's as powerful as the aspect of magic, if not more so. So I think that's cool. I think they could really push that forward and create 5 aspects that are not dragons. That would be OP. And that, like, what if Dragonflight ends with that, with the mantle being passed on to Thrall and Jaina and a few others? Super cool. I mean, Malfurion could be the aspect of the dream if Ysera passed that on to him. Who could be, what's that leave us? Life, Red, and Time. When she called to him again, Kalik finally answered, I am here, Jaina. As he replied, 2 things also happened. The least of those was a gap that opened in the air before him, a gap in the center of which formed the large circular image of a walled chamber he knew was hundreds of miles away. In that image, a feminine figure began to take shape. But even before that took place, Kalik himself went through a transformation. He shrank, becoming only a fraction of his original size. The dragon stood on his hind legs, which reversed at the knees and became like those of a man, even as the forelegs became matching arms. Kalik's wings and tail shriveled, finally vanishing. His snout receded into his face, which lost its scale and deep blue tint, at last refining into a pale but handsome young face worthy of any of the elven races. The most obvious hints remaining of his true self were his long blue-black hair and the hunter's garments he now wore, which were also of a dark blue and black. Kalik straightened, in many ways more comfortable as he was now than when a dragon. In this form he had learned what it was like to truly live, to truly understand happiness and pain. Indeed, often there were moments when he wished that he had been born as the humanoid creature he pretended to be here. That's interesting also. And it goes along with that theme of the humans, coming, like this being the age of humans rather than dragons, or not necessarily humans, mortals. As he finished transforming, the figure in the image also became fully distinct. However, unlike Kalik, the woman before him was exactly what she appeared to be: human, beautiful, so very powerful, and still so young for all she had been forced to experience. Kalik could see how recent events had done even more to harden her, although she tried to pretend that she had not changed. Jaina Proudmoore had not asked to become leader of the Council of Six, the Council of Wizards ruling the realm of Dalaran, but she had been the one to whom the other powers had turned after the sacrifice of her predecessor, Ronan. So at some point, these are all like spoilers for the future, at some point, Ronan becomes the leader of the Six, which means that Antonidas stops becoming the leader. Ronan makes a sacrifice, and Jaina becomes the leader. So this is a little bit painful. These are a lot of big spoilers, big reveals outside of where we're at. Jaina, the daughter of the late legendary and some would also say infamous Grand Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, had also had to balance her duties on the council with governing the island kingdom of Theramore. Also, a spoiler for those of you that haven't played the game, that you see Jaina's Dalen Proudmoore dies, but if you played through like BFA, they cover that. Like there are a lot of cutscenes that show that she's stricken with that he died. All that would have been too much for many creatures, dragons included, but in addition, Jaina had had to deal with both her part in her father's death and her failure to save Theramore from eventual destruction at the brutish hands of the Horde. We are two of a kind, Kalik thought as he beheld her. He kept his expression neutral as she focused on him. In contrast, Jaina smiled gratefully as if Calic had granted her a special favor and finally responding. That only made him feel worse. I was beginning to worry about you. Her voice was rich and melodious, at least to Calic, but tinged with pains and regrets. He marveled that she had the wherewithal to continue as she did, despite her grief for all those slain in Theramore and her remorse over what she had planned to do against Orgrimmar with the stolen focusing iris. Of course, that was also why he both admired and felt a bond with her. I appreciate your concern, Jaina, but I am fine. Are you? She leaned closer, almost seeming able to touch him. Her gaze bored into Calic, who felt as if the mage could read into what passed for a dragon's soul. You aren't sleeping enough. I can see that. You're driving yourself too much. All this work can wait a little longer. It has to be done, he blurted out too quickly. He was as surprised as she looked by the obvious bitterness tinging his words. Jaina recovered almost immediately, compassion replacing the surprise. The compassion only made Calic more abashed. How are you? He asked in a deliberate change of subject. How fares the Kirin Tor? Despite understanding just what he was doing, she allowed the change. We still struggle to keep things together, but we're doing it. You know as well as I do how things have turned upside down since your last visit. I've been forced to make some changes I don't like, but they're necessary. When Jaina did not elaborate on those changes, Calic did not press. He wanted very much to help her, but what could he, who could do nothing for himself, do for her? Perhaps it is time to end this, the dragon decided. Perhaps we could do nothing for one another. An image of the young Alexstrasza burned through his mind. Calic could neither suppress a gasp nor keep his body from shivering. Unfortunately, Jaina noticed both. Calic, are you ill? A dragon's roar, or more likely a proto-dragon's, drowned out whatever else she said. Still, the blue managed to put on a veneer of strength before the mage. As you said, I've not gotten enough rest. My apologies for frightening you. He tried very hard to sound indifferent, hoping that she would believe that he was well. Calic was not certain if his thinking was clear, but he had to hope it was, for other sounds and images were already assailing him. Jaina remained where she was. Her expression was unreadable. Are you sure you're all right? The image of another proto-dragon corpse took his attention. There was something even more unsettling about this one, but the image vanished before Calic could make sense of just what it was that bothered him. The sounds, especially the voices, grew maddening. Yes, he called too loudly. Forgive me. I have a council to convene. No longer caring if his excuses made sense, Calic dismissed the vision of the mage. Jaina faded away just as she looked ready to say something. The former aspect stumbled to the center of his sanctum, already reeling from the onslaught of voices and jumbled images. He was grateful that neither Jaina nor any of his dragonflight could see him staggering. Calic fell to his knees. He managed to plant a hand against the smooth rock floor, a hand partially scaled and with long wicked nails. Unable to focus, Calic contorted as his body sought some balance between his true form and the humanoid one he had put on for Jaina's sake. His mouth and nose stretched forward, and his legs shrieked with pain as his knees shifted back and forth. It was one thing to simply change from one shape to another, but to keep shifting between them took a toll that he had never suffered before. It was finally too much. Calic fell forward, and once again soared through the air as some part of the young Malygos. Time had shifted again. Alexstrasza no longer accompanied Malygos, but there were other proto-dragons in the sky, proto-dragons of at least 6 different colors. Despite their differences, they appeared disinclined to fight one another, although Calic suspected that could always change. Malygos radiated agitation, which in turn overtook Calic. What bothered Malygos was not clear to Calic. The proto-dragon had buried his thoughts deep this time, seeming not to want to deal with them himself. Part of the reason for so many different proto-dragons in the same region became obvious as a vast herd of huge beasts, some sort of brown, hairy caribou, raced along the low grassy hills below. 2 proto-dragons had already dived down and snatched up ready meals, but the smaller yellowish female failed to judge her dive and almost collided with the ground. As she pulled up, she was joined by none other than Alexstrasza, who had just snatched up another of the grazers. Unlike the other hunters, the fire-orange female had quickly bitten through the neck where the animal's great vein was located, killing it instantly. Kalak could sense Malagos's amusement at such a tactic. Most proto-dragons preferred their prey alive and fresh until the last moment. Alexstrasza, though, appeared to almost feel guilty about having to hunt at all. She tried to offer the meal to the smaller female who clearly needed nourishment, but the yellowish proto-dragon instead snapped angrily at her. Rather than grow furious herself, Alexstrasza continued to patiently attend to her companion. Even now she takes care of the helpless, Kalak thought with admiration. Oh, the sneeze coming on. Don't you hate that? Thinking of Alexstrasza as the aspect of life, here so very young, she still revealed far more concern for others than most. Malagos lost interest for the moment in the two females, forcing Kalak's perspective to shift to watching other hunters. The proto-dragon took mild interest in a coarse brown male's technique. The other male would hover over the running herd, then, seemingly prescient, dive toward it just as it made a sharp turn designed to put the winged predators off their mark. Not so the brown male. In fact, he seemed to know at just what angle and what speed the grazers would turn. Where more than one other hunter ended up only with mounds of torn dirt and grass, he plucked up 2 tasty morsels in rapid succession. That must be no Dormu. Malagos admired the other's cleverness and timing, then lost interest as 2 of the hunters who had failed to snag their quarry now hissed and spat at one another. No words passed between them. Like the gray male Kalak and his host had encountered previously, these proto-dragons were little better than the savage cats or wolves roaming other parts of the world. Malagos watched their angry flight with contempt, while Kalak again wondered why some proto-dragons had progressed towards sentience, while others had not. A few other proto-dragons in the midst of devouring their meals also watched, some with clear intelligence, others like beasts, wary that the fighters might try next to steal their food. One blue-green male sneered at the pair, then glared at Malagos when he realized Kalak's host was watching him. Koros. The name came to mind as if Kalak knew the other male himself. Malagos obviously did, and the enmity between them was clear. Koros hissed at his rival, and thrust his muzzle into his fresh kill. The blue-green male ripped free a hefty portion of bloody meat, then chewed it while staring at Malagos as if it had been torn from the latter's throat. Kalak sensed Malagos considering fighting Koros, but the dangerous train of thought was interrupted by the alighting of the small yellowish female near him. She snorted in frustration as Alexstrasza, still gripping the carcass, landed next to her and across from Kalak's host. My brother, began the smaller proto-dragon hesitantly. My sister says you found him. It startled both Malagos and Kalak that this was Alexstrasza's sibling. The colors were different, though her yellow tint was also not like that of the other 2 families Kalak knew existed thanks to Malagos. The only similarity between the females was their smooth, nearly glass-like skin, so different from the typical rough hide of most proto-dragons. We were 3 in the clutch, 3 to survive. Now only 2. Malagos dipped his head in understanding. For proto-dragons, a surviving clutch of only 3 eggs meant ill tidings for the family. Indeed, in many a healthy proto-dragon family, a sickly offspring such as the yellow female would have been slain at hatching. She seemed to be waiting for some more elaborate response from Malagos. He finally said, Your clutch brother. His death was strange. It was certainly not how Kalak would have replied if he were in Malagos's place, but Alexstrasza's sister seemed pleased. Yes, he died strangely. How did he die? I do not know. The smaller female leaned closer. There was another. No, Ysera, interrupted Alexstrasza sharply. We agreed that... Whatever she said next was lost to Kalak, who took advantage of Malagos's view to stare in amazement at yet another of the great aspects. Having known the Ysera of recent times, Ysera the Awakened, he could not imagine how this weaker creature could have become one of the most powerful forces in all Azeroth. Snapping and hissing brought Kalak's attention back to what Malagos was experiencing. Alexstrasza and Ysera, their necks bent back, maneuvered as if seeking to fight one another. Each displayed her sharp teeth and claws to her utmost, even Ysera proving capable of an incredibly menacing showing. Several times both heads darted in but then pulled back once more. Calic knew such confrontations from his own kind and could generally recognize what was real and what was simply normal display. But with the sisters, it was hard to tell. The jaws of both Ysera and Alexstrasza snapped dangerously close to the other's throat, and the claws scraped against hides more than once, and then a sound louder than thunder stilled not only the sisters, but every proto-dragon in the vicinity. The sound erupted again, shaking the rocky ridges upon which Malygos and many of the hunters perched. Several of the proto-dragons were cowed, and Calic felt even Malygos fight not to prostrate himself. Only then did Calic realize that the incredible noise was a gigantic roar. A vast region of the overcast sky broke away, descending with astonishing swiftness. The velocity caused the clouds to quickly scatter, revealing a sight that truly could daunt not only a proto-dragon, but even the most powerful of Calic's own kind. This was supposed to be a proto-dragon, but so immense was its size that not even a dragon could be chosen for an adequate comparison. Calic could think of no creature save one that could be used, and that would have meant comparing Galakrond to himself. Even though Calic had never seen the gigantic Galakrond in the flesh, the remote possibility that he would not have recognized this titanic being had been eliminated by Galakrond's name racing over and over through Malygos' mind. So he's as big as Galakrond. That's weird. In addition, though his host's brief glimpse away from the father of dragons to the other proto-dragons, Calic saw that not one of the hunters remained in the sky. Galakrond now commanded the world above, and there was no proto-dragon foolish enough to challenge that rule. He swooped down, passing over the entire region in a matter of seconds. In Galakrond's wake, there came a vicious wind that even tore several proto-dragons from their roosts and sent more than one meal toppling to the ground far below. Galakrond's roar was no less ground-shaking miles away, forcing Malygos and the sisters to grip their perches tighter. For such a colossal creature, Galakrond turned with remarkable agility. Once more, he passed over the now panicking herd, but this time with intent. Galakrond seized up 2 caribou in each of his much larger hindpaws, and scooped up another hole in his gargantuan maw, then rose up. The grazer in his mouth vanished down his gullet, and a moment later, so did both of those in his left hindpaw. By the time Galakrond leveled, all 5 of his catches were well on their way down to his stomach. But 5 was not enough. Galakrond veered back and lunged toward the scattering prey. This time, however, he suddenly pulled back. Confused at first, Calic watched as the bending of the vast wings during the halt created a windstorm that sent dozens of beasts rolling uncontrollably. Before several of the caribou could rise to their feet, Galakrond plucked them up. With at least 8 claimed that Calic could see, the father of dragons soared back into the clouds. It was not until several seconds after Galakrond's departure that the first proto-dragons dared move. There was no renewal of the hunt. Not only were the caribou scattered so far and wide that pursuit would have required too much effort, but most of the proto-dragons were still too shaken up by Galakrond's startling manifestation. Some took to the sky themselves and fled for calmer climes. Others remained subdued. The father of dragons. Calic could still not believe the stunning image. To witness Galakrond alive was something he could never have imagined. The Blue knew little of Galakrond save that he had been one of the largest beings to roam Azeroth, and that he had represented the shift from proto-dragon to true dragon. It was not that Galakrond had actually fathered all true dragons. That was a myth somehow spread millennia ago, but that after him had come the 5 aspects in their respective dragonflights. Proto-dragons had all but vanished after that. There were other legends concerning Galakrond, but in truth, Calic understood that only his 3 counterparts knew the truth. He had never thought to ask them about the father of dragons, but now wished that he had. Yet Calic's momentary awe soon gave way again to his anger and frustration, and growing concern over his being trapped in these ancient visions. Each one seemed more and more lifelike, as if his own time were the fantasy and this scene now were the true present. Not for the first time, he tried to will himself back, but nothing changed. He continued to be an insignificant, unnoticed phantasm trapped within Malygos. Not even Alexstrasza or Ysera, both of whom in the future had abilities that would make them sense his presence, so much as glanced in curiosity at the male beside them. I will be free, Calic abruptly roared, though his roar went unheard by any save himself. Bereft of a throat or a body, he felt like nothing but a memory remembered by no one. Laughter filled his, or rather Malagos's, ears. Calic at first thought that someone mocked him, but instead the laughter was aimed at the other proto-dragons by a charcoal gray male a bit larger than most, who actually sneered at the others. Little hatchlings, he bellowed, afraid of the sky, afraid of the ground. Galakrond laughs at you for being afraid, and I, Neltharion, do too. Some of the proto-dragons hissed at the gray male, but no one challenged him. By their glances, they knew him to be strong and able to back up his taunt. Even those proto-dragons who clearly had little more intelligence than their prey appeared to know better than to fight. Neltharion? The name finally penetrated. Calic sought in vain to seize control of Malagos's body, as the newcomer, still laughing, flew off. Where Galakrond had been a startling, unsettling thing of legend, this gray male represented a danger to the future of all life on Azeroth. If there was a creature more evil than Neltharion, Calic could not think of one. Of course, by the Blues' time, the gray male would be better known by his more apt title, Deathwing, in case you didn't know. All right, so I think we've gotten a snippet of Nosdormu. I think that's who that one was, but we've now seen all the others, and we've seen Galakrond. Cool. I could do with a little bit less of the flash forward just for spoiler purposes, but otherwise this is cool. I have enjoyed the story so far, and I hope you guys have too. So we got another episode in the pipe 5x5, and I look forward to seeing you all next time on Lore of Warcraft.